Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Go for Growth webinar with the professional energy people today on the pathway to net zero carbon. We've got quite a few people signed up today, so I'll just do some quick housekeeping as people are joining us this morning. So we are on Zoom, as always, in Go for Growth. What that means is that we're recording the session this morning. So a copy of the recording and a copy of the slide deck that we're using this morning will be sent out to all registered attendees. So everything you see on screen this morning and everything you hear from the three of us, you'll get copies of. Also, the video will go onto the Go for Growth YouTube as well, and the slides will be made publicly available. So everything you see, you'll get. Although we're on Zoom, we do encourage any interaction and Q&A and chat the way through. If you want to say hi and introduce yourself on the chat, please feel free. That's not mandatory. If you've got any questions, if you could pop them in the Q&A, please feel free to do so as we go through. We have carved out some time for questions at the end, but please don't feel like you've got to wait. So just pop anything in the Q&A as and when you've got a question, and we'll come to it. In the unlikely event that we, well, I say it's unlikely, it might not be that unlikely. In the unlikely event that we run out of time for Q&A, if there are any questions that we haven't answered or we need to go and find out more information for, we'll do that, and we'll make sure we answer them when the slides and the recording come out to everybody. It's usually around 48 hours between the webinar and the slide deck and the recording coming out. So what we Tuesday, so probably by end of Thursday that everything will come out. So we'll do introductions in a second, but if you've been on a Go for Growth webinar before, you probably know who I am, but I'm Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders of Go for Growth, and we're a micro-social enterprise supporting any providers, but typically smaller organisations in the voluntary sector in public sector procurement opportunities and grant funding opportunities. But we're dedicating today to thinking about carbon net zero. So we'll cover what climate emergency and what carbon net zero is. We'll also take a look a bit later on the scopes 1, 2 and 3, the challenges and benefits alike that suppliers and local businesses are facing. And then my colleagues in Professional Energy People will also talk through some updates on reporting requirements. So if I can say, firstly, thank you, Kaylee and Jason from Professional Energy People for joining today. If I can ask you both to do a brief introduction, that would be super helpful.
Yeah. Senior Energy Consultant at PEP.
Hi, I'm Kaylee and I'm the Commercial Manager here at PEP.
Thanks, Kaylee. And I'm going to drive the slides. So whenever you're ready, just tell me to click onto the next slide. But I think the next one's yours anyway, Kaylee.
Perfect, thank you. So just a quick introduction of PEP and our services. So we're a well-established energy consultancy based in Rotherham, and our services include energy procurement, making sure that each customer procures the correct energy contract for their strategy and ethos. Energy management, helping businesses on their journey to net zero. Renewable projects, we have an in-house project manager who can help facilitate taking the strain off the business there. Compliance, keeping customers updated with changes in legislation and helping them become compliant when required. And we can also help businesses identify when they do not have to comply as well. That's really important to add. And we have site works and metering, which is your new electricity and gas connections into new builds, upgrades and downgrades for existing buildings, landlord supplies, and sub-meters for property management agents.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Kaylee. And it's a real pleasure to have you both join us on this webinar today. So thank you again for that. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, but just in case that you're joining this call and actually you're not hugely familiar what climate emergency actually is, I'm going to cover what carbon net zero is in a few slides' time. But so, and actually, if you use any of the search engines, you can find different definitions of what climate emergency is. But effectively, it's referring to this urgent need to address the rapid changes in global weather patterns and rising temperatures. So that includes things like increased frequency, increased intensity of extreme weather events, heat waves, droughts, floods and storms. And when we think about the causes of climate emergency, they're typically always driven by human activities. So things like burning fossil fuels, deforestation activities, industrial processes, and those activities in and of themselves are increasing greenhouse gases, the GHGs, in the atmosphere. And there are different types of greenhouse gas, but carbon dioxide, CO2, is the one that we are thinking about most often when we're thinking about carbon net zero. And they're released mainly from burning things like fossil fuels. The impact of all of this, we probably touch and feel and see as humans every day in different ways and to different extents, but we have effectively three types of consequence that I'm going to cover this morning. So environmental consequence, so things like rising sea levels, loss of biodiversity, for example. We can see clear evidence of degradation of ecosystems, increased pollution, etc., etc. There are social consequences also that are brought to bear by climate change, climate emergency. So health risks from things like poor air quality. We've got heat-related illnesses, impacts on vulnerable communities when we've got extremes in certain weather conditions. And they all reflect in economic impacts. So increased costs from extreme weather damage. If we think about the absolute devastation that's happening in Jamaica at the minute, insurance costs, disruptions to supply chains, disruption to life, loss of life, all of those things. So the implications of climate emergency are profound and substantial and far-reaching. And I guess we will all be able to list the things that we not just see on the news, but the things that we experience in our own day-to-day lives. So we might have been a victim of flood, for example, from extreme rainfall. We might also have been impacted by the increase in costs of insurance premiums. We might have been impacted by infrastructure damage. But when we're thinking about the public sector and the responsibilities in climate emergency in the public sector, we're thinking about actually that infrastructure. How do we prepare our infrastructure to take account of potential climate emergency impacts and implications? And how do we repair and recover from the damage of those implications? And we know that there's a ripple effect of all of this. So if there are health risks in the vulnerable, we know that that would be an impact on our National Health Service, for example, and it will compound an issue that is already there. And in terms of climate emergency, so when we're pulling together some stats, over 300 local authorities have declared climate emergency, and that includes, at last count at least, and this might have changed, at least 91% of London boroughs have all declared climate emergency. The National Health Service as a whole has recognised climate emergency as a health emergency in and of itself. And the NHS have really sort of set a marker that they want to become the world's first net zero health service, not next zero health service, net zero health service. And so there's a real commitment in the NHS around decarbonisation and reduction of carbon. Universities UK, so UUK, report that all universities have signed up to some level of commitment to tackle climate emergency in the higher education sector. And in the blue light sector, the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, in collaboration with the National Police Chiefs Council and Blue Light Commercial, they launched a policing decarbonisation programme in November 2021. And we're doing some work in Go for Growth with our sister company Net Positive Futures to help the public sector to tackle some of that decarbonisation in Scope 3 purchase goods and services specifically. And Barnsley Council have recently joined 32 universities in that Scope 3 programme. But the point really of the slide is that the public sector at large is recognising and has declared in the majority climate emergency, and that will flow through to us as providers to the public sector through the tender processes, potentially through grant funding applications, and in the everyday delivery of contracts that we undertake for the public sector. But what is it? So net zero in its most simple context, and actually Kaylee and Jason might have a far better definition of this than I do, so feel free to jump in and tell me if there's a better way of putting this. But the way to think about net zero, I guess, is that it means cutting carbon emissions to a small amount of residual emissions that can be absorbed and durably stored by nature and other carbon dioxide removal measures that leave zero carbon in the atmosphere. And of course, we know that we've got a target in the United Kingdom. So the net zero carbon by 2050 is the UK government target. One of the complexities of working in the public sector is that very few individual public sector organisations are mirroring that 2050 target. So I sit on the board of trustees for a multi-academy trust as a volunteer in South Yorkshire, Nexus Multi-Academy Trust. Our target for net zero is 2030. If you work for the National Air Traffic System, for example, their target is net negative by 2040. And what you find is a real proliferation and variability of those targets. So whilst the UK government target is 2050, individual public sector organisations and in local authorities, that's likely to be a dual target, a target for the council and a target for a borough. So there is a real challenge, I think, for us as providers in terms of what the public sector are trying to achieve on carbon and the role that we play as providers in that. And I think, and it's a very personal opinion, but I think from a Go for Growth perspective, we are thinking that it will take every single business and every individual to take some sort of action proportionately and relative to our businesses and our lives, because it probably calls for nothing less than a complete transformation of how we produce, how we consume, and how we move about as humans on the planet that we've got. So in order to get there, we all need to do something. And the something will be, as I say, my keywords in life are proportionality and relativity. So what we do should be proportionate and relative to our lives, but proportionate and relative to our businesses as well. And there are, I don't know if anyone's familiar with procurement policy notes, but Crown Commercial Service, the Cabinet Office, issue procurement policy notes. So there was one in June 2021. It's now in 2025, known as PPN 006. You can go on to gov.uk and have a look at the full PPNs, both 0621 and 006, which is of this year, to have a look at it. The main message on the procurement policy notes, and there is a lot of detail behind it, but if you are bidding for contracts where the total contract value, excluding VAT, is £5 million or above, then you will be required to have a carbon reduction plan as part of your tender. But what we're seeing in public sector as Go for Growth is that much, much smaller values in the tens of thousands, not even necessarily in the hundreds of thousands, clients, public sector contracting authorities are asking in two main ways for submission of a carbon reduction plan as part of the tender, or on a self-cleaning basis, can you commit to making available a carbon reduction plan should it be required at any point during the life of the contract? And that's really pushing some need for activity into the supply chain around being prepared and understanding what we can do as businesses and providers to take some steps to reduce our carbon. And that comes with both challenges and benefits. So there are some challenges in just the data around this stuff. So often carbon is measured in relation to spend-based data, which comes with a health warning in and of itself, in that if an organisation is using spend-based data and you have a proportion of that spend going to your carbon footprint, if you are growing with that client and your spend therefore increases, therefore so does your carbon emissions proportion. And of course, that is a very counterintuitive place. So our recommendation to anybody thinking about carbon data is, from a public sector perspective, to use primary data so that you get accurate carbon data that reflects the activities that organisations are taking. We also know that lots of businesses, especially smaller organisations, small and medium-sized enterprises, haven't yet calculated their carbon footprint. And we know that there's lots of information out there, but not a huge amount of clarity. And so we hope that today, especially on the reporting information that professional energy people will talk about, will actually give some clarity around what's required, what are the reporting mechanisms. But it can be really difficult. If you've never calculated your carbon footprint, you can find lots of different tools, some that will do that with a cost, some that will do that for free, some that will use all different types of calculations. And often it will end up in being about selling offsets. And so it is a challenging environment, especially for smaller businesses to work. But the point of today is to say that there's definitely help out there. My colleagues at Professional Energy People, their contact details are on the slide. So if you want to have a chat with them after, please do so, because there's tons of help there. But notwithstanding the challenges, there are also benefits to local businesses. So I'm not going to read out on screen what's on there, you can see that, but some examples. So in cost savings, we found on the Business Climate Hub, I'll pop some links in the slides so you can have a look at these in more detail. We found for an organisation called Crystal Doors, for example, a company in Rochdale actually achieved a 44% reduction in energy consumption by investing in renewable energy and energy efficient machinery. So there can be really good fiscal savings to thinking about reducing your carbon. It can also increase market competitiveness, also on the Business Climate Hub. So consumers and clients are increasingly favouring environmentally responsible businesses, and you can see that in some of the bids and tenders and grant applications that are going out. So adopting sustainable practices and carbon reduction practices can actually enhance brand reputation. But it also manages regulatory compliance. It can minimise and mitigate risk. So aligning with environmental regulations reduces that risk of non-compliance. It reduces the risk of any penalties, and it also prepares businesses for future legislative changes. So things like the Environment Act 2021, for example, sets legally binding targets for air quality and waste reduction, and that has had big implications for, you know, certain industries across the UK. But it can also be a really useful mechanism for accessing investment and funding. So investors are increasingly prioritising sustainability, and there are companies that with clear net zero strategies potentially finding it easier to secure funding. The UK Net Zero Review highlights, and some of these numbers are staggering, but highlights that climate transition could provide UK businesses with more than 1 trillion investment by 2030. And you can find that on Chapter 0. And then it can also create growth opportunities in and of itself and opportunities to be innovative. So this shift towards net zero can drive innovation. So it can lead you to develop new products, services, new ways of working. So there is a distillery called the Cooper King Distillery, who became the first distillery in England to achieve net zero carbon emissions by implementing sustainable practices. And as a direct result of that, attracted a whole new customer base. And you can find out more information on that on the Business Climate Hub as well. So there are real examples of why, regardless of the targets that public sector might be putting into their procurement opportunities, there are real social, environmental and financial and growth opportunities that the transition to net zero can give us and can offer providers to the public sector. There's some real tangible economic advantages for businesses there. So hopefully, and it's a very polarising topic, carbon net zero, but hopefully that illustrates that there are some real positive drivers for businesses to take proactive action in this space. So I'm going to stop talking a little bit. I'm going to hand over to Jason. I think it's you up next. Or is it you, Kaylee?
No, I think Kaylee's going to take this one.
Yeah, I'll
Kaylee.
take this one.
Sorry.
Thank you very much, Jill. So myself and Jason just wanted to attend today to give you a little bit more information on a couple of the compliance schemes that are out there. A lot of businesses on this call today probably don't need to comply with either, but we thought we'd give you an overview And then obviously you could, if you've got any questions at the end, then we'll be happy to answer them. So the first one I'm going to speak about today is the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, often referred to as ESOS. Now, who needs to comply? So large companies, as defined by the Companies Act 2006, are legally obligated to report on at least 95% of their energy usage if they meet at least one of the following criteria. So if you've got a turnover or gross income of £44 million or more, and you have to have a balance sheet assets of £38 million or more. So if you've got those two, you've got to comply. Or if you've got more than 250 employees, and that's full-time equivalent employees. So if your organisation qualifies, you will need to survey your sites and analyse 12 months of energy data to find energy saving recommendations. You then need to report your compliance to the Environment Agency by the 5th of December 2027. So for example, phase 4 is due to start on the 1st of January 2026. So you will have to start gathering all that information from the 1st of January effectively. Now, there are rumours that for the next phase, which will be phase 5, which will start 2030, the criteria that I've just gone through will be reduced to encapsulate more businesses having to comply. Now, that isn't set in stone, it is just a rumour, but it's definitely something to have a think about. Now, we sometimes get businesses come to us and say, oh, somebody's phoned me and told me I need to comply with ESOS. That's where we can have a chat with you and find out whether you need to comply. More often than not, you don't. And actually what's required is maybe just, you know, a really easy carbon reduction plan. Next slide, please, Jill.
Perfect. Thank you, Kaylee. There was just a quick question, actually, and I don't know if I know the answer. So there was a question in Q&A that said the 250 employees, is that global or in the UK?
In the UK.
In the UK. Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
So what's involved for your business if you have to comply with ESOS? So you need to get your current energy consumption. So like I said, for phase 4, the 12-month reporting period is from the 1st of January 2026 to the 31st of December 2026. And you will need to also get future forecasts based on the business strategies. So you probably need to pull in your ops managers and things like that. Then you've got your operational activity and processes. So you'll need to, again, operational manager, occupancy times, machines that are consuming a lot of energy, what types of fuels you use as a business, and your power distributors. And then you need to evaluate your buildings, so your heating, your lighting, is it LED, your roof structure and orientation, can there be solar put on that, is it south facing, insulation, windows, and basically everything around your surrounding area of your business. And then obviously you need to look at your energy strategy. Ring fencing budgets, you know, when setting your actual business budgets is an amazing thing to do. You can also look at finance options. I think, you know, nowadays if you went to you know, a finance company and asked for money for solar that's going to have a return on investment of 5 years, I doubt they'll say no. And then you can also, we've popped this SEG from solar panels, so that's basically your return for feeding back into the grid. That's not something I massively promote, only because it's not a big revenue stream. It's not a great amount. It's there, but it's not something that I massively recommend.
Thank you.
This is the second piece of legislation that large companies have got to comply with. As you can see there, the catchment criteria is similar to ESOS, slightly different numbers, and it says at least 2 of the criteria. So again, the 250 employees is per company within the corporate group, and SECAR is aimed at the individual company, not the corporate group. So how this differs from ESOS is just reporting. So you've got the carbon footprint that you need to report in your annual returns. And within that report, scope 1 and 2 are compulsory, but scope 3 is still currently voluntary. But what we're seeing is the larger companies are realizing that this is coming down the path, and they're asking smaller companies to report on their emissions. And yeah, the data from ESOS can be used in SECAR. So when you go back to this like collecting of the raw data, you've got to keep that sort of separate and translate that into scope 1 and 2. So the question is, so what are scope 1, 2, and 3? So scope 1 is direct emissions. So that is basically fuels that you burn. So the main one is natural gas, if you've got gas-fired boilers. The other one is diesel and petrol fuels that the company buys and puts through the company-owned vehicles. So that's scope 1. Scope 2 is indirect. That's the electricity that you buy. So at the power plant, a fossil fuel is burned, and then the electricity is transferred to your site. Another one for indirect is if you've got a district heating main. So if you're having heat delivered and that heats your building, then that's an indirect emission as well. But scope 3 is the more difficult one, and the easiest way I can explain scope 3 is somebody else's scope 1 and 2. So what that means is there is 15 categories, and each of them 15 categories, what we do is we do an impact analysis of them to see which one is the most impactful on your operation, and we'll suggest ways of approaching your supply chain to ask them the pertinent questions to get that scope 3 emissions back. And it's the scope 3 emissions that basically capture the smaller organizations, voluntary organizations, into producing a carbon footprint. So slide, please.
Can I ask a quick question actually on scope 3, Jason, if that's all right? So you mentioned that it's still voluntary. I was at Procurex last week, and I think I heard that in Scotland, at least, scope 3 reporting will become mandatory next year. Have you heard anything about whether scope 3 will become mandatory reporting?
I've heard no dates of when it will become mandatory, but I have heard a lot of talk about how it's all going to develop, and yes, eventually it will become. But yeah, I haven't heard anything from the Scottish government about it mandatory.
Okay, all right, no worries. Thank you.
So when you get the request from the larger companies, it can come in various sort of terms and names. So what we have here is sort of like two main areas. The one on the left is your carbon footprint. So these are all the sort of ISO and PAS standards that go to calculating your carbon footprint. We've got that PNN 006 up there as well, which is what Jill talked about earlier. On the left-hand side is the different terms that carbon management plans get called. Carbon management plan is just to basically how are you going to reduce your energy, how are you going to reduce your emissions. So what I'd say is if you are approached to supply any of this, please give us a ring, and we'll take you through what each one of these mean, and walk you through the scope 1 and 2 is fairly simple. As I say, it's just dealing with your gas and electricity usually, and converting them into emissions data. And yeah, this is it's all part of a larger policy, and at the bottom there, ESG has been sort of bandied about quite a bit. The net zero is sort of like a small part of the environment of the ESG. And so ESG reporting is a much broader scope. So if you get asked for that.
Cool, thank you. And I think these are how people can get in touch with either Kaylee or Jason if you want to have a chat. So these will come out with the slides. So feel free to get in touch with Professional Energy people if you want to follow up. We have got a question in the Q&A actually. So, and I think, I don't know the answer, so it might be one to take away, or I'll see if my colleagues Jason and Kaylee know. So the question is, if your landlord provides energy to the company, does this count as a scope 2 emission for the company or a scope 3 emission because it's provided by someone else?
So the so the landlord, so is it part of the tenancy agreement? So within the tenancy agreement, does it say we will provide you with heat and electricity?
Right.
Is the question. If it does, it is the landlord's responsibility to supply you with that, and therefore the landlord's contract. So it's the landlord's scope 1 and 2. It's your
Right.
scope 3.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. So we'll open up for questions, and I will, there's a couple of observations I wanted to just make whilst we see if we've got any more questions in the Q&A. When you were talking about ESOS, I was thinking to myself, actually, regardless of whether you comply or have to comply with ESOS or not, looking at your energy consumption, your operational activity and processes, evaluating your buildings and thinking about your energy strategy, all just sounds like really good things to do, regardless of the size of the organisation, because it would give you, I guess, some of that baseline, Kaylee, wouldn't it, in terms of whether I've got to be compliant or not. Actually, if I'm really serious about reducing carbon to help my growth or whatever the driver is, they're not bad places to start, are they, I guess?
Absolutely. We've got a lot of, there's not many of our customers that have to comply with ESOS, yet we've got a lot of customers who they report on their data, and they have invested in energy audits for their buildings, which has resulted in a plan of action on projects and going from no cost, low cost to CapEx projects. These reports have been able to highlight energy waste effectively, and that's what we're looking for. It's what people need to. I think that's the starting point for me, is you need to have a look at what you're wasting, get that right down, and then from there, let's see if you can take it to the next level and reduce it by becoming more energy efficient. But it's that waste that I think people, when me and Jason go out to customers, and once Jason's done the energy audit, they're actually dumbfounded at the waste, the energy waste that they actually create. So it can be quite startling for people at times.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. So I'm sort of from an engineering background, and as Kaylee says, when we go through things, we look at sort of plant items and things like that, and we spot inefficiencies that if you had a decent maintenance person looking after it, they would have spotted that anyway, and they would have made them savings. But what seems to happen these days is your sort of like maintenance people, get forgotten about. It's a cost to the organization, so they don't look at that. But a good maintenance guy is worth his weight in gold when it comes to sort of maintaining and reducing your energy and the costs of your operation. So yeah, I mean, as an oil engineer, I'd advocate getting somebody in to have a look at your systems.
Yeah. And I think we'll have all types of different businesses that come to you and come to Go for Growth. And so, well, Go for Growth is a fully remote business. So we don't have an estate, if you like, that is dedicated to our businesses. But we will all be in our building of some description. And so all of those things still matter and they still count. And no matter how small or big you are, I think you can definitely make a difference. So Go for Growth has reduced our carbon footprint by 50%. Now, we started from a fairly small number, admittedly, but still, I think, you know, there is a contribution that everyone can make, and our energy management was one of the places that we started. So no matter how your business is set up and structured, I think, you know, they feel like really good places to think about. And of course, if you're wasting energy, you're also wasting money, aren't you? So not only are we hurting the environment, we're hurting the purse. And you know, fiscally things are tight for almost everybody at the minute. And so regardless of what kind of business you are, if you're working from home, then it can be financially so beneficial to have a look at that waste, because it's just dead money that you might as well just chuck it out the window, I guess.
Yeah, I would also say, you know, before you, because let's face it, like you said, Jill, times are tough. Money's tight for businesses in every single aspect. So, you know, before you go out and, you know, spend money on anything, check to see if there's any funding available. It's really important, because there will be some, and unfortunately, sometimes the word just doesn't get out there enough. If you're not a member of the chamber, for example, or you're not you know, on newsletters for councils, then that might pass you by. So I would always say check to see if there's any funding first.
Oh, definitely. And green funding is getting more and more prevalent, I think. So funding, especially for, because I mean, any anchor institution that's rooted in place with a local authority and NHS Trust, etc., but typically local authorities, they don't want cost to be a barrier to decarbonisation. So some of those big capital projects that you were talking about, Kaylee, that there may well be partial or full funding out there, but it's usually locally based. So I absolutely agree. Go and have a check of what's available to you locally in your local area through your combined authority, local authority, growth hub, chambers, etc. We've got a question, a dead interesting question actually. How can an AI provider that relies on cloud providers calculate their emissions? Is this something we can do ourselves, or should we get a third party to assist?
I'd probably approach the cloud provider, and because what they do is that's your scope 3 emissions. So I'd approach them to say, right, okay, what is your scope 1 and 2? What is your sort of carbon management plan, and let them lead. What I would say is, so when it comes to, I mean, I would ask the question, do you have your own offices? So that becomes your scope 1 and 2. So that becomes your carbon footprint. But even if you don't have offices, does anything go through the company, as in sort of, you know, if you work from home, does any expenses go through the company? Because then you've got to apportion that scope 1 and 2, because you are, you know, you're heating your home and you're using electricity there. But yeah, I would approach the cloud services and see what policies they've got in place, to see what they're doing.
Yeah, perfect, brilliant. Thank you ever so much. That's a good answer. Hopefully that's been really helpful. We haven't got anything else in the Q&A, but if anybody thinks they've got a follow-up question, all our contact details will come out with the slides and the recording. So please feel free to get in touch with us outside of this if there is another question that anyone's got. What I will say is thank you so much, Kaylee and Jason, for joining today. It's been really interesting listening actually about ESOS and SECAR, and actually just focusing on we can all do something but that's relevant and proportionate to us and our businesses, and it will give us benefits as businesses in our growth and our, you know, and financially, and you know, if we can focus on that energy waste as well, then you know that's a really great place to start. So thank you ever so much, both of you, for attending.
Thank you for having us.
Everyone else, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for taking time out of your calendars this Tuesday to join us to talk about carbon. And hopefully we'll see you all again on another webinar sometime soon.
Perfect. Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.